Have you ever wondered if you could predict injury before it actually occurs? Turns out you can. Science has discovered kind of a new concept called heart rate variability, and it can show you how you can become injured, or it can tell you when you're going to get sick before you actually get sick. Because before how your body is feeling changes, there's signs and symptoms within your body in the data that change first. And that's where heart rate variability comes into play. So heart rate variability is the difference between the distance between beats. So this is supposed to look like a heartbeat. The first one looks pretty good. I got all the waves right. They just kind of went downhill from there. But that's besides the point. So the distance between each heartbeat is different. Your heart does not beat like a metronome. There's variations between the distance, in the distance between each beat. And that variation is where heart rate variability comes into play. More variation is a good thing because that means your body can basically tolerate greater extremes of stress before it needs to have that heartbeat to regulate itself again and continue to pump the blood. So it's essentially a balance between sympathetic activity and parasympathetic activity. The very basic generalization of this is rest and relaxation and fight or flight. So this is where the majority of Americans are because we're all stressed out all the time. And this is what we tend to not have enough of. So when your heart rate variability is higher, when you have more variability, your body can tolerate more stress and you have more parasympathetic activity going on. When your heart rate variability is lower, you have more sympathetic activity going on because the nervous system is it's kind of like an uptight person always needs to be like this. When the nervous system is uptight, it needs to beat on a very strict schedule. Everything needs to fit in its box, and it can't tolerate when something doesn't fit in the box. So this is supposed to be kind of like a balance in reality, or a scale. In reality, we want those nervous systems in the body to be balanced. We don't want too much in one bucket and not enough in another bucket. So how you interpret heart rate variability goes over to here. So it's based on your normal. So everyone has a different number. There's certain accepted ranges for various individuals and various ages. So as you get older, you tend to have less variability because your body can't tolerate as much, which makes sense. As you get older, things start to break down and not work as well. In general, this is the range. So 20 would be like an elderly female, 80 would be a young male. So that's the normal, but you can have values up to 200. Like anything else, this falls on a bell curve. So this is where the majority of people would be. I would say the majority of people in their 30s, 40s are probably looking at a number between 50 to 70. That would be normal. It is not a sign of fitness. That is something important to differentiate because it can be like, well, higher is better, right? Well, sometimes yes, and sometimes no. If you have too much parasympathetic activity on board, that's not a good thing. If you've ever heard of POTS or postural orthostatic, I'm forgetting the rest right now, but basically when you stand up, your blood pressure drops and you get really dizzy. That's a bad thing. That's too much parasympathetic activity on board, not enough sympathetic activity. So it needs to have a balance. So it's not a sign of fitness because of that. It's a balance. It's not a specific number that you can rank and compare with other people, because really where the value comes in here is when it's different from your normal amount. So say you're pretty solid for heart rate variability around 60, and then all of a sudden it starts to trickle down and you have about a week or so where you're in the 40s. That would be a significant deviation that would predict that you're more likely to get an overuse injury or you're more likely to get sick. So for example, my heart rate variability is on average about 140. That's 150. It's not normal, but it is what it is. When we hiked the Grand Canyon last week, the day after, my heart rate variability dropped to 100. So that is about a third of the overall amount. So when it drops that much, that means if I were to do another strenuous workout, or if I would be silly enough to decide to hike the Grand Canyon again, I'm more likely to get injured than the first time I hiked the Grand Canyon because my body isn't ready to adapt to the stresses. Your heart rate variability can improve with training though, But again, remember, it's not a sign of fitness. The reason it can improve with training is because it tends to improve when your overall health improves. So if you're someone who hasn't worked out very often, you get your heart rate variability checked, and then you start working out. A month or two later, your number goes up. It could be because you worked out. It could be because maybe you're eating a little bit healthier. Maybe you're sleeping a little bit more. Maybe your stress went down. Maybe your relationship with your spouse got better. Maybe your kids decided to start behaving more. All those things can influence heart rate variability. It's not only a marker of fitness, it's a marker of overall health and wellness, which is why it can predict overuse injuries and why it can predict when you're going to get sick. You can track it if you're interested in tracking it. There's two main devices I suggest. One is HRV for training. So that's a once a day measurement you do every day in the morning, and it doesn't give you your number. It shows you where you are on a spectrum and tells you when you're too high or you're too low. Whoop, which is what I wear, gives you the exact number, and it gives you recommendations and recovery based on where you are and how far you are away from your normal. So, and it also takes it at the exact same time, or at least at the exact same, the way they take it, the time of day is systematized, because if you take this at different times of the day, you're going to have a different answer. Because when you're exercising, your heart rate variability is going to be very low, simply because your heart rate is very fast. So the time between beats is shorter, so there's less room for variation. Compared to when you're lounging on the couch, drinking a beer and watching Netflix, your heart rate variability is probably going to be higher because it's going to be nice and low and relaxed. So that's heart rate variability in a nutshell. If you take nothing else away from this video, the most important thing to take away is that it's basically an indicator of your overall health and can help predict an illness or an injury before you actually feel sick or get injured. Sarah with Resilience RX.